Welcome one and all to another build video. This is my absolution scion, which is the most powerful absolution character since the inception of the skill, and is probably also one of the more powerful summoner characters currently in League. In the background there's going to be footage of me doing some different endgame encounters, mostly uber bosses, but there'll also be some mapping and delving later on. I'm going to try to make like a full build overview for this character, since I've done a lot of interesting stuff that I believe can be viable on a variety of different archetypes, and I'm pretty much the only person building absolution this way as far as I can tell. Almost everyone else is a necromancer, so hopefully there will be some takeaways. The character as it is right now is probably quite close to the maximum you can get out of absolution. I've invested quite a lot of currency into it now. The damage has turned out to be really insane, and it's also quite survivable, as you can hopefully see in some of these clips. But you can definitely make it work on a lower budget as well. I did leak out this character, and I did clear the entirety of the endgame during the first week of the league. So yeah, you don't need a lot of currency to make this work, certainly not more than for like different summoner archetypes. But do keep in mind this is still an absolution character, the skill can be quite clunky, the AI definitely isn't great, so yeah, just so you know what to expect. Here you can see me doing an 8 mod feared. The damage on this character is extremely high, as you can see the bosses kind of just melt. It can go up to 150 million DPS, maybe even higher. But this is still a summoner character, so the damage can be a bit spiky at times, depending on whether or not I have Val Absolution up, and also depending a bit on Spectre buffs and debuffs. Generally though, the damage is quite high to the point where you can skip a lot of different boss phases. Like I mentioned before, the character is also quite well rounded defensively, especially from a softcore perspective. You can tank most of the stuff in game, like the Cirrus Diabeam that doesn't really do significant damage. It's survivable enough so that you can do almost every encounter in the game deathless, but there are still some mechanics you have to interact with, because for some reason some boss mechanics ignore some of your defenses, namely this one, the Exarch ball phase. You will see me struggle a bit here, because I take quite a hefty amount of damage from the Exarch balls even at 90 fire res, because you can neither suppress nor block the balls, so part of my defenses are just kind of useless. But as you can see, it's still definitely doable, deathless if you pilot it somewhat correctly. Here you can see some mapping. This is just a random map. The mapping on this character actually turned out quite decent, at least to my standards. I have quite high movement speed, and the clear is pretty okay, especially with the Explode Animate Guardian. It doesn't work quite as well in high delirium maps because the explodes can't chain very well. Yeah, I mean, it's not great obviously, but I do kill the monsters and I don't really die. I guess I just wouldn't recommend farming high daily maps on this character. But generally, mapping content, like if you're just farming some league mechanics in I Can Go maps, this character is quite good for that. Very high movement speed, pretty comfortable. Definitely doesn't die in maps. This is a flawless Chayula, which kind of just gets destroyed. And the physical damage reduction on this character is also quite good, which is why you can see me tanking some slams here without much trouble. But like I've said before, this character definitely isn't immortal like some of my previous characters, so I can't just stand in the middle of Uber Welder and tank everything. I do have to dodge some of the mechanics. This is a simulacrum, wave 30 courses. I've done a bunch of simulacrums, all of them deathless. Definitely isn't an issue. The character certainly isn't ideal for simulacrum, but it can work. Like I get 5-ish rewards every time. Yeah, so that's pretty okay. I've also been delving quite a bit. This is a Gehenix at 1.1k delve depth, who kind of just falls over. I could be delving quite a bit further, even though this character is not optimized for delve at all. But I don't know, I just kind of ran out of time, and I've also burnt out on the league. This is the last clip, which is just an all fight at around the same depth. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the footage. I'm going to be going in-game and showing you what I've done with the character. Here we are in-game. This is my character, Karl Muscular Goldenlass, level 100 in Crucible Softcore. You can look at it on the PoE Ninja ladder if you want. I'm going to try to make this video as short as possible. Hopefully it doesn't run too long. Keep in mind this character as it is right now is worth around 2.5k divine orbs. I'm well aware that most people don't put nearly as much currency into it, but it's also extremely overkill for everything in the game. Like I mentioned, I did least that this definitely works on significantly lower budgets, but just keep that in mind. First off, why am I a scion and not a necromancer? Well, necromancer has had its +2 removed a while ago, and in my opinion since then it's been very mediocre overall, for summoners at least. The only really good node left on necromancer is mistress for the self-offering, and well, scion also gets self-offering from this, as well as the aura scaling from Commander of Darkness, which is pretty relevant on my character. And then I also get some additional skill points, as well as the Guardian node, which provides mostly just some flat PDR and onslaught. By itself, Scion is probably a side grade from Necromancer, but it does specifically enable this militant faith, which is extremely important to my build. And I will explain what it does in detail later on. Secondly, I'm also not using Doryani's prototype like a lot of other Absolution characters. Doryani is also in a pretty bad spot in my opinion, since the melding nerf and then the removal of Kalanda Jewelry is quite annoying to get to your negative lightning res. You have to use either the nerf melding or multiple Ventors or Threads of Hope, which are usually not optimal. And Doryani's prototype also has a very crippling downside that's extremely hard to build around in my opinion. Like it pigeonholes you very hard into some specific defensive choices, like going Divine Flesh for example. But it's just very hard to make a defensively well-rounded character with Doryani's prototype at the moment in my opinion. By not going Doryani's proto, I also don't have to go for lightning conversion, which means I can instead use hatred to go cold conversion. Hatred is the most powerful aura in the game. This is known, this has been known for years, and I try to abuse it as hard as I can on my setup by getting hatred effect everywhere I can. I have a over 300% hatred effect I believe, and pressing this button just provides me with a shitload of damage, and it also makes my summons able to chill and freeze. As you might have already seen or guessed, this character is basically an aura stacker, or more like an aurabot for my summons I suppose. I'm grabbing every aura reel on the tree except for Champion of the Cause because it's a bit too far out, and this is also one of the main reasons to go Scion. This isn't exactly a new concept, but it's kind of fallen out of favor. But with the Necromancer nerf, I think this is currently the best way to build summons, especially Fizz to cold convert summoners, because you can abuse hatred so hard. In terms of offense, this character is quite generic in most ways, but not so generic in some others. Firstly, the tree is pretty normal for a summoner type build, well, apart from all the aura stuff, but this part at least, double cluster, 12 passive here and 8 passive here, and then I'm just grabbing the Spectre wheel, the crit wheel, and this wheel. In terms of offensive gear, really generic as well. This is a +2 aggressive wand, minion shield with +1, minion ring, really nothing special going on. I'm also running this mirrored minion helmet. This league, lots of people have been running mirrored wands with squire setups, but in my opinion these are pretty meh at best, like a side grade to just running a regular wand and shield, because you lose so much defense from dropping your shield, and you're never gonna have a proper crucible tree on a squire. And these helmets, you can also make much worse ones. Like for most of the league, I was using like a 30 divine helmet. So this one, it's like if you have like a 2 or 3 mod helmet, they're often good enough to use them over 6 link. I'm also running triple curse with Whispers of Doom here, and then +1 curse on the body armor. I have Arcanist Brand in here, and then Ellie Weak, Asmark, and Punishment, which are the 3 best curses for damage. It honestly baffles me that Agnes Brand hasn't been nerfed yet. Maybe it will be next patch, but until then, it's really convenient and curses are still extremely strong, so there's no reason to not go for triple curse. Defensively, this character is extremely boring. I've basically just piled together all of the generic defenses there are in the game. This character has Grace the Term with around 60k armor and 87 evade chance. I am 100% spell burst capped. I have 90 max res from, well, with Melding of the Flesh, and then I use Purity of Ice and some additional max res on the shield to get to 90 overcap. I also have some amount of block right here, around 60-40, from the self-offering from the Ascendancy node. I would like to have more spell block, but unfortunately I can't fit Tempest Shield and it doesn't scale with Aura Effect, so it feels a bit bad to include. I'm using triple Elemental Flask with Mage Blood. I have some amounts of regen, which are just okay, mostly from Guardian and the Mage Blood suffix. I'm also 100% ailment immune using this jewel, this jewel, Ancestral Vision, which makes my suppress apply to avoid ailments and then at half value, and then I get the remaining 50% from my boots and chest to reach 100%, which makes some encounters, namely Simulacrum, much more safe. I also have some amount of flat PDR, which makes my overall PDR quite good. As you saw earlier, I was taking Shaper Slams and Elder Slams without any issues. The flat PDR is mostly from endurance charges, the Guardian Ascendancy node, as well as this node, which gives another 5 flat PDR. And I think that's mostly it. The character is not like immortal levels of tanky, but is definitely survivable enough, like I mentioned before, to do every encounter in the game deathless. And personally for me, this is more than enough. Right, let's talk about the Militant Faith. I'm using a Militant Faith in conjunction with an Unnatural Instinct to get lots of devotion in this spot at Scion, 275, which allows me to get lots of whatever secondary stat is on the Militant Faith. In my case, this is reduced mana cost of skills and increased effect of non-curse auras, which are two extremely premium stats that are very hard to come by. I believe this setup is, I didn't come up with this, but it's extremely viable and very underrated still, and it can be used on a variety of setups, even entirely different archetypes, to get whatever you want on the Militant Faith pretty much. There are lots of different useful stats on here. You can also get stuff like non-dam ailment effect, or just damage, or res. And it allows you to stack it very efficiently, because you're not really spending any bad points on this. You would like to have all of these anyway, or most of them anyway. These life nodes, obviously, the travel nodes you're taking anyway. These life nodes are pretty mediocre, but for me there aren't really any better life nodes available anyway, so that's fine. And these nodes are arguably a bit bad, but I need them to cap my suppress anyway. It's pretty hard to get your last few percentage of suppression, so I can just spec them. And then the Militant Faith also provides you with a keystone, obviously. In this case I'm using Power of Purpose. You might also be able to use Transcendence. Power of Purpose is really OP actually, or maybe not OP, but is at least hidden okay, I guess. Because if you're reserving all of your mana and not spending any mana to cast skills, which could be on a setup like this, or on a setup where you run EB, which is not really unpopular or anything, having additional mana doesn't do anything for you, so you just delete some of your mana to gain some armor. In my case, this results in around 9k armor. Dreamcore made a video on this just last week, I believe. It's actually quite a good node and really underrated. Well, like I mentioned, I'm using a Militant Faith with Aura Effect and, well, sorry about that, Aura Effect and reduce mana cost of skills. And doing this allows me to get to 100% reduced mana cost of skills, which is usually the only way to achieve this is with a Militant Faith. I'm getting 27% from here, however much this wheel provides, which is 15 I believe. And then the remaining is from this Mage Blood Flask, as well as 2 ring prefixes, which leaves me at 100% reduced cost, which not only makes my blessing free, but everything else as well, which is extremely convenient. It removes some of the hassle with using a trigger wand since it has a cost multiplier, but it doesn't matter in this setup. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to use life tap or anything on your offering. So yeah, the militant faith, like I said, really, really strong and still quite underused. I'm gonna get into some of the finer points of gearing, or at least those that I think are worth talking about. I obviously need a lot of reduced mana reservation on my build to be able to fit 5 auras into my mana pool. I get some amount from all of the wheels on the tree, all these small nodes give reservation efficiency. And then I also have multiple jewel implicits, uh, these ones. But I'm using a tech that can be viable on every build in the game, I believe, just to get that extra smidge of mana that you might need, which is +1 Socket in gem gloves with your Enlighten in there. I'm using an Awaken Enlighten 5, but obviously this works at every level of Enlighten, and then you can put your auras in there, and then also maybe use +2 AoE to boost all of them by 2 levels. This is not very expensive, just get whatever fractured suffix you want and use a couple of faceted fossils until you hit int gems. And it costs you 1 suffix, but it might save you from having to use like a reservation cluster or something similar, which are usually have pretty high opportunity cost, and this might just be better. Secondly, I'm using these boots with the +2 to Socket minion gems, Delve mod Fractured, for my support summons, which is an Element Guardian and my 4 Spectres. This is extremely underrated. I've never seen anyone else use this, or rarely if ever, I guess. And these boots are pretty cheap, like the Fractured base costs like between 2 to 5 divines maybe all throughout the league. And there isn't really any opportunity cost attached to it, since the third prefix on boost is pretty dead on most builds usually, since you have life and movement speed on there anyway. So yeah, this helps boost your support minions, since survivability for them has been a big issue in recent patches. And it can also help you get your Spectres to level 25 for the additional Spectre breakpoint. So yeah, just a really good tech that's viable on every summoner build in the game that I think more people should go for. I also want to talk about Bone Offering. Most people will know that this skill is pretty good, but I don't think very many people are quite aware of how insane it can get in the right setup. Bone Offering provides block to your summons, which then gets redirected to yourself if you have Self Offering, which in my case makes me end up at around 60-40 block, like I mentioned. But what it also does is grant minions cast speed. This is obviously only relevant on summons that count as casting a spell, but that does include absolution. And in my setup, with the additional quality from Awaken Enhance and Ashes, as well as the offering effect from my body armor boosts and the mastery right here, Bone Offering ends up giving my summons something like 70 to 80% increased cast speed, which is absolutely bonkers. Like for me, Bone Offering provides almost as much damage as Spirit Offering, on top of giving all the block and the regen. So don't use Spirit Offering or Flesh Offering, and don't use Divergent Bone Offering for that extra block either. Just regular quality Bone Offering provides so much damage that is definitely not worth skipping. I'm going to quickly talk about my support summons. I'm running an AG of course, which I get into in a bit, and then 4 Spectres. You get the third one from the level 25 Spectre gem, and then the fourth one from Death Attunement right here. I'm running 1 Primal Crush Claw, 1 Pale Seraphim, 1 Arena Master, and 1 Carnage Chieftain. I have no idea if this is a correct setup. I can definitely say you want at least 1 Carnage Chieftain, because he just provides a lot of damage. But the other ones you might want to change up. The Primary Crush Claw is probably the best out of the other 3. But I'm not experienced enough with Spectres to be able to tell what to go for. There might definitely be some other viable options. This is just the setup I decided to run with. For the Animate Guardian, I can recommend 2 slightly different setups. One is more for mapping, the one I mentioned earlier, which is able to trigger chain explosions with the AG. And the other one is more for bossing, which has higher survivability and slightly higher damage. On both of these, you will want to run a Kingmaker, but if that's too expensive you can also run a Dying Breath, since they're usually pretty cheap and not much worse. In the Helmet slot you want to be running a Crown of the Tyrant, but you could also use a Learcast, which is slightly worse and much cheaper. In the boost slot you always want Legacy of Fury, ideally with very high rolls and a regen enchant. The only difference between the two setups is in the chest and the glove slot. If you're doing the explode setup, you want an explode chest and Gravevines, and if you're doing the boss setup, I guess, you want to be using Doppelganger's Guise and rare gloves with corrupted blood immunity if you want to be doing Cirrus, some additional res the Element Guardian might need, and the Unnerve implicit that comes from the Exarch orbs. Unfortunately, my audio for the POB section broke, so I'm gonna have to do a wonky voiceover here. POB also is lagging a bit in OBS, but this is the POB. As it will be in the description, it has all of the items as they are in game. In the config, I've included all of the AG gear. I also have this line for punishment here, since I haven't ticked enemies out on low life, but this is just makes it easier to see your average damage. And then I have less player damage because I never really stopped to hit with the safecast absolution, as well as the less ES because I don't have any ES recovery and it just inflates numbers. The shock is set to 30. On almost all non-Uber encounters it's much closer to 50, but it should be close to 30 on pinnacle Ubers. Enemies are exposed to cold via elemental army on the support minions. And then enemies are chilled is important for hypothermia, but this is always up because all of my minions deal cold damage. And most enemies that can be frozen are also frozen. There's this are your minions on full life box that I have ticked, which comes from the single renewal I have. It just provides 5% more damage. You can also untick it if you want. The frenzy and power charges. Frenzy charges come from the Khan's Chieftain and power charges from Asmak. These definitely aren't always up, especially not at the start of a fight, but the minions ramp up pretty quickly, but you can also set it to a lower value if you want. The Fortify doesn't really do anything, I believe. The nearby allies is important for the Onslaught mod from the Guardian Ascendancy node. This is set to 5 so it knows that I have Onslaught, but with 5 support minions and up to 4 temporary minions, should be up all the time. These boxes down here do something, I don't know what. I've also set the POB to average damage, or the max it. I do have space suppression, so if you set it to melee, it's more realistic for Fizz Slams, but as you can see it's 30k and you saw me taking all the Fizz Slams earlier as well. And then you can set it to spell and the max it go up really far. This character is pretty survivable. But I think that's it for the POB. It will be down in the description, of course. Hopefully I've covered everything that I wanted to. If you have any questions regarding the character, just let me know. And if enough people are interested in seeing a lower budget or league starter version, I'll definitely look at that as well. In conclusion, this character has just been great. It completely surprised me. I started this out as a POB project, just plotting the tree and seeing where it would go, and then the numbers ended up looking really good. So I league started the character still not being convinced, but it completely blew me out of the water. From league start to Uber endgame, this character was just cruising through the game. Really surprised me. I think Absolution definitely has a place as an S tier summoner skill if you can stomach the clunkiness the skill has, because the damage on it is just really insane, and with the addition of Val Absolution the clear is also quite good, and Val Absolution is just such a fun button to press. I really enjoyed just doing some different mapping strategies on this character. I mapped more than ever this league, farming up a storm. I also don't think this build will be changed at all, or definitely not nerfed in the next league. That's starting soon. To be fair, I did abuse the hell out of the Crucible passive trees this league, so those will obviously be gone. But that doesn't mean the build won't be more than viable even in the next league. So if you want to deal a lot of damage and don't want to press a lot of buttons, this might just be the build for you. But that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching.